Hey there, my name is Adam from Powerbelt 3D, and the other day, actually yesterday, I officially launched the Tiny Belt on Kickstarter, and I hosted a live stream launch party for everyone to follow along, learn more in depth about the project, do some live Q&A, and celebrate the launch. I know that everyone's schedules didn't allow them to make it to the launch party, so I wanted to make a recording so that all of you can see anything that you missed. If you end up watching this and are interested in supporting the Tiny Belt project on Kickstarter, I will make sure to put a link in the description of this video so that you can go learn more about what it is all about. I hope you enjoy and happy printing. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the official Tiny Belt launch party. Like I said, feel free to introduce yourself to everyone in the chat and say where you are tuning in from. Typically, anytime you do one of these things, you need to give a few minutes for people to join and figure out the different platforms. So I made a couple polls to help all of us get to know each other a little bit better. So the very first one I have for you is how many 3D printers do you have? So you should see a poll pop up on your screen, and you can just vote to say how many 3D printers you have at home or maybe in your business. I'm seeing the results show up on my screen right now, and in about another minute, I will share all of those results with you. I just want to get an idea a little bit more of who's watching and how much 3D printing experience everyone has. So feel free to fill out the polls. Much to my surprise, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but right now the leading category is 5+ 3D printers. So super interesting. Prusa's Mark III's and Anycubic Mono. Awesome. And I'll go. I've stopped seeing poll answers come in, so I'm gonna stop the poll right now. There you go. By a little over half of everyone watching has 5+ 3D printers. And if I wasn't running PowerBelt 3D, I'm not sure that I could get away with having 5+. So I guess good for all of you. And then looking at kind of your experience in 3D printing, I want to know, how long have you been working with 3D printers, whether you're kind of newer to it or whether you've been doing it for a few years now. Go ahead, click on the result that most matches your experience, and in just a minute, I'll show you all what the results were. Right now, the leading category is 4+ years. So between the amount of printers that people have and the number of years they've been working with 3D printing, seems like we have a very experienced group joining the launch party. What the wife doesn't know won't hurt you. That applies so much to 3D printing and so many other hobbies. I'm lucky that my wife is just incredibly supportive and patient, to let me get to do this sort of thing. Started in 2003. That is so long ago, but that's awesome. Thanks for being here. So, looking at the results, it's absolutely true. We have a very experienced group of people joining us tonight. Um, Next question, kind of specific. Have you ever used a conveyor belt 3D printer before? So, standard Cartesian style 3D printers or Delta printers have been around for a long time, but conveyor belt 3D printers are just now starting to become more affordable and more accessible for other people. So I wanted to get a gauge on everyone. Have you used a belt printer before, or have you not? We've got 1 minute left on the timer, so go ahead and get your results in. Loving seeing all of the comments in the chat room. Does the beta count? I think if you have a Tinybelt beta printer, it does count as using a belt printer before. Um, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the poll in just a few seconds. If you still have to submit your vote, we're about 2/3 of people who have never used a belt printer before, and that makes me so happy because part of my whole goal for the Tiny Belt project is to make it affordable and accessible for as many people as possible. Um, so one thing is a technical question. If you're using a 3D printer, I've seen so many different opinions on people that like touch screens or people that don't like touch screens. They might like them because they're colorful, they're easy to use. People might not like them because they get fingerprints on them. So I'm so curious what everyone tuning in thinks. Are you more of a touchscreen person or are you more of a scroll wheel person? And I'm seeing them compete 50-50 kind of back and forth as the votes are coming in. So let me know um, what your opinion is. Both. um, right now we have 40 people viewing the launch party. So thank you all so much for being here. And exactly as I thought, there are strong opinions either way. Good integration with the firmware, I agree, is more important than the interface itself by a long shot. Okay. Still have a handful of people that haven't voted. If you want to get your vote in, I'll be turning off this poll in just a few seconds. Okay, touchscreen one, which is a little surprising for me because I ran a similar poll on Twitter, I think last week, and the LCD click wheel won by just a few percentages. So it's definitely pretty split, close to 50-50. But again, really interesting. Um, and then conveyor belt 3D printers are really good at two things compared to more traditional 3D printers. So let me know in the poll, are you more excited? You can't pick both. If you had to pick one, are you more excited about printing infinitely long parts, or are you more interested in cranking out a whole bunch of smaller parts and not having to clean the build tray every single time? Let me know. Go ahead and fill out the poll. And before we get too far into this, I do have two monitors in front of me and my camera over here. So if it looks like I'm looking all over the place, that's just what's going on between the camera and my notes and, all of that stuff. So we're about halfway done with the poll. Make sure to get your answers in. And this is always so interesting to me anytime I ask this question because it's almost always split. And a lot of people have said both. Um, so I'm going to turn off this poll in another few seconds if you haven't voted yet. And infinitely long prints is the winner. That is surprising to me. I didn't really expect for that to happen. I always thought automated print removal would be the main reason people were excited about belt printers. But being able to 3D print really long parts on such a small machine is also just really cool. The first couple of times I did it, I had no idea how useful it could actually be. And then last poll before we roll into kind of more of what I have planned is are you planning to back the Kickstarter? And I gave you three options available. So there's yes, on the fence, or maybe you're just hanging out to learn more or um, be supportive of the project in some way. So let me know what you're thinking. The Kickstarter will go live towards the end of the launch party. So let me know what you guys are thinking. Um, Honestly, depends on the price. That's a great answer. I don't want anyone to spend money that they don't have on supporting the project. Um, so definitely my goal the entire time has been to make it as affordable as humanly possible. So if if you're planning on supporting the Kickstarter, feel free to answer the poll. I'll give it another few seconds so that you can all get your answers in. Interesting. Lots of good thoughts in the chat, wanting to use the printer for props and other things. What does the mosquito add to it? The mosquito tier is the most expensive tier. The mosquito tier is still less than the price of a Prusa i3 Mark III. If that gives you any idea on the price, you can see the results of the poll here. We have just under half saying yes, absolutely, and another 60% being on the fence. If you have questions, I will be doing Q&A again towards the end of this launch party. I wanted to address a lot of common questions and concerns first. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Control board. I've been sourcing electronics from Big Tree Tech and being really happy with them. So um, it'll be 32 bits. It will be silent stepper drivers. But other than that, let's hold all of our questions towards the end, um, and we will get started. Let me pull up the presentation. 1 second. Thank you all for joining. My name is Adam Fosnot. I am a mechanical engineer, and I have been working with 3D printers from under $200 to over $200,000 for over 8 years now. You can see me pictured there with my awesome wife and our little cat Mia. She is the official director of quality appearance for Powerbelt 3D, and she likes to keep me company when I'm working on printers and steal little nuts and bolts and knock them around on the floor to stress test them for me. Fun random fact about me that I sometimes get made fun of for is if I'm pouring myself a glass of water, I like it to be at room temperature. And people seem to have strong and interesting opinions about that, so I thought I would throw that in there. Um, so really the reason we're here today is to celebrate the official launch of the Tiny Belt. And the Tiny Belt is a mission of mine to create the quote unquote Ender 3 of conveyor belt 3D printers, which immediately begs the question, why the Ender 3? A lot of people might associate the Ender 3 with being cheap or low quality. But in reality, I'm super inspired by the Ender 3. It's inexpensive, it's minimalistic, and that makes it uh, a lot of people's choice to be their first 3D printer. And I think over the years, its design has proven that it's just good enough for most people, most consumers. And what I mean by just good enough is that it's a functional printer without a lot of extras. It doesn't have a sophisticated extruder or hot end, but it gets the job done well enough for most people. And I'm sure people have opinions one way or another, but I think the overall popularity of it has proven that these things are accurate. It's also upgradable, hackable, and what I think is so cool is that low cost pieces of equipment like this have the tendency to build whole communities around them. I compare the Ender 3 and the K40 inexpensive laser cutters as two really good examples of that, where people can gather in Facebook groups and forums and share tips and tricks on how to get the most out of a super affordable piece of equipment that helps people with their hobbies. This project really started about a year ago, so I wanted to start by recapping where we've been so far before I dive into the actual campaign and where I want to take this project. So, in about January of 2021, I had just resigned from my full time job at an industrial 3D printer distributor the month before. I was super excited to go out on my own and try to make something happen. I had started prototyping my first conveyor belt 3D printer way back in 2018 and had been struggling between my full time job and working on Power Belt to really get traction for it. And I was so excited that I didn't have a lot of focus at the very beginning. So I made a podcast and I also started working on some non belt printer products, still in the realm of 3D printing, but not specifically belt printers. And then I had a realization that I should refocus some of the things that I was working on. I had spent 3+ years learning about belt printers, and I felt I should probably focus on that area and share what I had learned to help other people learn about belt printers. So in July of last year, um, and up to now, in July of last year, I unveiled the first prototypes of the Tiny Belt. I sent out an application and picked a small group of people that wanted to test out the printer. I ordered all of the parts to build the printers, and I sent them out to everyone. So between July of last year and now, I have been working with the beta testers to improve the printer, and I'm seriously just so I'm just so thankful that they have been willing to help out. It's been great to be able to work with people that have different skill sets than I do, whether it's material science or programming, and coming together to work on something. In January, by the end of that month, I had 28 beta printers that I had shipped. Over that time period, I had made countless small design changes, and I still have a short list of improvements that I want to make for the printers that will be delivered to Kickstarter backers. And we'll go over some of those in a little bit. So, I wanted to show where we are at today, and in order to stay organized, I recorded a little video that I will play for you. Transparency is super important to me. So I wanted to be able to show some of the areas that I want to improve about the beta versions of the Tiny Belt, and how I plan to address those. The first thing that some beta testers didn't like was the quality of the 3D printed parts that are actually used to build the machine. In the past, I have had countless conversations with people about what they think a quality 3D printed part is without ever actually coming to an agreement on what that means or what that definition should be. I think it's still pretty subjective, at least until we have established, agreed upon ISO engineering standards for this sort of thing. That being said, some of the parts that were shipped out were admittedly not beautiful, perfect, crisp 3D prints. As I've shipped more and more beta printers, I'm going to drop off number 26 later today at UPS. I've tried to be more careful about which parts are included in the actual printer. With more resources later on, I think I can be more critical of the quality control in that area. When the heat beds came in, they were a little larger than expected. Instead of being 300 by 300 millimeters like I expected, they were actually 325 by 325. This meant that for the beta printers, I had to come up with some creative workarounds since now the frame that I had ordered and had arrived was now too small. The result of this is that the back roller of the printer is a little too short. It works. On occasion, it'll come loose from the roller bearings. So it's not ideal, but ultimately it does work. After the launch, I will make the frame a little bit bigger and order longer rollers. I was hoping that users would be able to switch back and forth between the touchscreen interface and a click wheel interface. However, the standard cables that Big Tree Tech sends out with their LCD screens doesn't allow that to actually happen. This should be an easy fix by just requesting from Big Tree Tech to send a different cable with the LCD screen so that it matches with the board correctly. That being said, the full color touchscreens are pretty expensive. We're talking like 4 times more expensive than a standard small click wheel interface. So this is one thing that I'm thinking about changing for the launch. If I change to a non-touchscreen LCD with a click wheel, it will keep things more simple because Big Tree Tech won't have to send out a different cable compared to what they're sending out to everyone else, and it'll help keep costs down. On top of that, I imagine that more people are familiar with the standard Marlin click wheel interface, so that could be a win all the way around. Another issue that came up is that the heat beds are 24 volts while the rest of the printer is 12 volts. And this only came down to a communication issue, again, between myself and Big Tree Tech. The solution seems pretty easy. We'll just convert the whole printer to 24 volts for the launch. As a result, the heat bed takes a while to heat up. The workaround that I have been using is heating the bed up to 60 degrees C, letting it sit there and stabilize, and then increasing it up to 65 degrees C. And I've had good luck printing PETG with that arrangement. It's not ideal. It tends to take a little while. It's a little annoying, but it's been working for me. Once the bed is actually at that temperature, it can stay hot and keep printing for many, many hours. During beta testing, we learned that the combination of the small rollers combined with the wide area of the print volume caused some challenges with the conveyor belt laying flat on the heat bed. As a result, I revised the recipe of the Formula 32 conveyor belt and have made some improvements, but it's still a bit of a work in progress. So I have shipped a whole bunch of Formula 32 conveyor belts, and we used them on the Zero back in the day. So I consider them a tried and true recipe. However, the newer, what I've been calling the Formula 32S conveyor belts, they haven't been tested as much. And so at this point, I can't really make any promises on how long they should last. It's something that I'm going to keep working on tweaking and developing between now and when I actually have to ship tiny belts to people that support the Kickstarter campaign. What I think may be the craziest thing about all of these drawbacks is that despite all of them, I have still been able to get what I at least think are good, high quality prints off of the beta printers that I'm running. So, question S as in super. I like that idea. I was more thinking S as in small rollers. Um, but truthfully, um, I'm not sure what the last name is, or what the final version of the name is. So, despite all of those imperfections that the video discussed, I've still gotten what I think at least are really high quality parts off of the Tinybelt betas that I've been running. And you can see some images here. And when the Kickstarter page goes live, there's actually a link on that page to a Google Drive folder where you can see full resolution photos of these models that I printed. So let's look at the actual specs of the machine. Um, Throughout my entire design process, I wanted to keep the goal of the project in mind to create the Ender3 of conveyor belt 3D printers. But if you look on the screen here, even though I named it the Tiny Belt, it's not actually the tiniest printer, which I intentionally did, ironically. I think it's kind of funny. But I wanted to give it the right amount of features, specifically around the extruders and the modern silent stepper drivers to be able to create good results. And here you can see how it compares to other conveyor belt 3D printers. In particular, the extruders and the stepper drivers are really similar to the Creality CR30 and the Sane Smart Infit 20. But because the frame is so minimalistic, we are able to get the price down even more. The $399 price tag absolutely will not last forever. I can't create printers at that price point and create a sustainable business. But at least for the Kickstarter, to say thank you to people supporting the project early, I was able to chisel the price down to $399. A lot of questions that I've gotten have been around post Kickstarter upgrades or enhancements or things that they've seen on other belt printers that they're curious if the Tinybelt can pull it off. The first is part removal. So here are two concepts that I have for 3D printed part removal. The one on the right hand side of your screen is an off ramp that you can use to drop it into a box or another bucket of some kind. And then there's a standalone printable 3D part catching bucket on the left side. So these are mostly 3D printable, and by adding some small M5 bolts and T-slot nuts, you can easily bolt them to the front of your machine. Next, we have a long part tray. So this is a different concept than what people are usually used to with extended rollers off the end of a 3D printer, off the end of a belt printer. In my experience, rollers for things are really overkill. So this is the concept that I came up with that I'd like to offer later on, where we could use a smooth sheet of acrylic or something low friction like Delrin or nylon, and then use heat bed springs, just like you would use for the heat bed, so that you can adjust it to be perfectly in line with your conveyor belt and still print long parts when the printer is sitting on a desk. And finally, I have a half-baked wall mount kit inspired by Alan over at Repcord, who has hung many Creality CR30s on the wall for easier storage. The frame of the Tinybelt is great for belt printing. So again, with some simple hardware and two printed parts that mount to the printer and one printed part that would mount to the wall, you can hang Tinybelt on the printer. I've been a little too scared to actually try it because 3D printers aren't the lightest things to be hanging on your wall, which is why it's still half baked, but it is something again that I plan and hope to offer in the future. And I wanted to address the question, is the Tinybelt Kickstarter for me? A lot of people have strong opinions about Kickstarter campaigns and whether or not people can actually deliver on them. So first, I wanted to look at good reasons why you might want to back the Kickstarter campaign. If you love 3D printing, love open source designs, and you want to support things like more belt printers being on the market, US 3D printing companies, and potentially a stepping stone into the future of manufacturing, and I'll get a little bit more into that in the actual Kickstarter video, then I think backing the Kickstarter would be a great idea. However, if this would be your first 3D printer, this probably isn't going to be a good campaign for you to support. 3D printers have a learning curve in order to use them effectively to build your projects. So if this would be your first 3D printer, which seems like it's a very small part of the audience, I imagine that going and buying an Ender3 would be a better first step to get into the hobby. The other thing is if you will be angry with delays. I believe that the biggest challenge in actually delivering Tinybelt printers on time will be the current supply chain uncertainty that the world is facing. This is affecting big companies, small companies, and chances are that something will happen that I didn't expect, whether it's during or after the campaign. So if a brief delay is going to make you upset, it's probably not the best idea to back this campaign. And the other word of warning I would give to you is if you have written an angry 5-page email to a company before, I would kindly invite you to not support the Kickstarter campaign. For the last few years, I have been a team of one, getting some help now and then from my wife. But I am building, hopefully, a successful 3D printing company really from the ground up. And Phil, I think that comment is so funny. Hate delays, love writing 5-page angry emails. Hopefully, that those of you who are watching know yourselves well enough to know whether or not you want to be a part of the ups and downs that can be uh, launching a new product from Kickstarter. Next, I wanted to go over the reward tiers that I came up with for all of you. And the first one is that I call the extra early bird tier. So if you are watching this campaign or this launch party, you have a great shot at getting one of the extra early bird tiers for only $3.99. That is absolutely as low as I can conceivably uh, create and ship a printer to you, and then I have the shipping dates there also. Expected time frame for shipping is the middle of July, based on the current timelines. If it's delayed, you can absolutely change the shipping address. Those are good questions. Next, we have the early bird tier, just taking some terminology from previous um, campaigns. Uh, for whatever reason, it's always a bird themed. So the bulk tier is actually at $4.99. That I called the hawk tier because I don't know, hawks are cool birds, and for whatever reason, Kickstarter tiers are bird themed. So if you are watching this, there's are 42 people viewing, so you have the option to or the opportunity to get a super low cost belt printer. And finally, we have the Tinybelt Plus Slice Mosquito tier. Um, so you will get a 90% assembled Tinybelt kit with the Mosquito hot end already installed and a set of 5 purpose made custom nozzles made for belt printing. The belt printing nozzles are designed by me, and I have shown my design to Slice, and they've confirmed that it shouldn't cause any issues with their Mosquito hot end. And you can see it side by side with 2 more standard 3D printing nozzles, the Mark 10 and the Mark 8. So the Mosquito nozzle is going to be longer and sharper than currently available 3D printer nozzles. After having a lot of experience on my own and meeting with iFactory 3D, I believe that these will interface with the Mosquito and create nice, crisp prints compared to what is more standard available. Looking at some Q&A, I wanted to start with some of the most common technical and non-technical questions that I have been asked over the last 6-ish months as this project has gone on. The first question is why the single cantilever arm? I've gotten this question so many times from people who are worried about rigidity or print speed and acceleration and things wobbling around. And I'm happy to report that the cantilever arm is surprisingly rigid. It is mounted to a 3mm steel plate, and it has 4 V wheels that grip the back aluminum extrusion of the frame, so you can tighten and adjust it nicely so that it doesn't move around while it's printing. So far, again, based on my experience, but also no beta testers have said that it causes print issues due to the design, and it is part of the reason we're able to make this so affordable by keeping the frame minimalistic. What stepper drivers? I think I already answered it in response to a chat question. But based on the control boards that I've picked out, they're going to be silent TMC 2209 stepper drivers, which should hopefully allow for some firmware updates for new features in the future. And then print speed has been a question that's popped up. The current PETG profile that I'm printing with ranges from 15 to 40 millimeters per second. And the reason for the 15 millimeter print speed is actually for the outer shell of the prints. So just like on a traditional 3D printer, the first layer is usually printed slowly so that it can stick well to the heat bed. The outer shell needs to be printed slower so that it can constantly stick to the conveyor belts during printing. That being said, I haven't tried to max out the print speed on any Tinybelt. The pack of 5 nozzles are going to range in size. I was thinking 2 of them in 0.4 millimeters and then going up there to 0.8 millimeters so that you have a variety. The Mosquito does use an M6 thread pattern, and I'm going to keep moving to the non-technical questions, but we will have time at the very end for an open Q&A. First question of the non-technical variety I have been asked is, how will I fulfill all of the Kickstarter rewards? Which is a great question, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. During 2020, I was working full time and still shipped roughly 60 3D printers out to customers, even during 2020 with all of the awfulness. In 2021, again, working by myself, I shipped another 40 ish 3D printers, both zeros and Tinybelt betas. I'm hoping that with some more scale, I can move quickly and hire help. The Kickstarter goal is set as a real goal at $80,000, not a marketing campaign trying to raise $10,000 that couldn't actually launch a product. So I'm hoping that I will be able to hire local high school and college students. Currently, the Power Belt office is located very close to a STEM-focused middle school and high school and multiple universities. So I will be able to help students learn more about 3D printing and recruit technical talents there. I also get asked, how is it possibly so cheap, especially being made in the United States? I put a lot of effort into making it a minimalistic design that leverages current off-the-shelf parts that are already used in 3D printers today. I've also been sourcing aluminum, sheet metal, and electronics from China for a few years now, so I have good relationships with suppliers lined up, and I know what to expect in terms of pricing. Last common non-technical question is, what about the post-Kickstarter price? And I'm really not sure what it will be eventually. I'm thinking around $7.99, which is not Ender3 priced, but I think that would give people a good discount to thank you for supporting the project early on. And as volumes grow and I start making thousands of printers instead of 50 to 100 printers, I'm hoping that volume discounts will allow us to, again, make it as affordable as possible. The nozzles that I'm making will only be available in brass. However, in talking to Slice, I know there's a potential for them to offer more belt-specific printing nozzles in their Bridgemaster and Vanadium blends. However, I'm not totally sure on the timeline for those, but will be available at some point in the future. And as demand grows, maybe I'll be able to make some stainless steel or hardened steel nozzles from my design also. But initially, only brass for the mosquitoes. With that, I will show you the official Kickstarter Tinybelt video. Um, and then we will go into an open Q&A session as we wrap up the launch party. Congratulations if you made it this long into the video. I know this was a long one, but it was a great time getting to interact with everybody virtually and to celebrate the launch of the Tiny Belt. Before you leave, make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it and consider subscribing to the channel if you want to stay absolutely up to date with all things related to conveyor belt 3D printing. The link to the Kickstarter is in the description if you forgot. Thanks again for watching. Happy printing.